As I laid my 9-year-old to rest alone, my family sipped champagne across town. Then Mom texted, "Quit being dramatic. This is urgent." She meant my late son's $850,000 trust fund. Have you ever felt so utterly alone, so completely betrayed, that it felt like your entire world was cracking apart, while you were standing at your own child's funeral? Because that day, as they lowered Caleb's tiny casket into the ground, a different kind of horror began. The casket was impossibly small, too small. That was my first coherent thought, the only one that managed to break through the impenetrable fog of grief as they began to lower my 9-year-old son, Caleb, into his final resting place. My hands wouldn't stop trembling. I tried everything, pressing them against my black dress, gripping them together until my knuckles turned white, even shoving them deep into my pockets. Nothing worked. The tears flowed endlessly, silent rivers down my cheeks that I no longer had the energy to wipe away. My stomach knotted with each mechanical whir of the pulley system, lowering his precious casket, and my knees threatened to buckle beneath me. The cemetery worker nodded at me, waiting for some signal, some sign that I was ready for this moment. But I knew, with a crushing certainty, I would never be ready. It had been 18 months since the monster began stealing Caleb's strength. 8 agonizing months. Rare blood disorder, the doctors finally said, as if simply labeling it might make it less terrifying. But Caleb, my brave, incredible boy, he took the news better than I did. His small face was serious, yes, but so determined as the doctor explained the treatments. "Will it hurt?" he'd asked, his voice steady despite his age. "Sometimes," the doctor had answered honestly, his gaze soft. "But we'll do everything we can to help you." And he never complained. Not once, through 8 months of needles, transfusions, medications with names I could barely pronounce. Even when his small body was ravaged by fevers that left him shaking beneath hospital blankets, he'd look up at me with those eyes, so much like his father's, and say, "I'm okay, Mom. Don't worry. I'm a Zaid." He was referring to his favorite superhero, a made-up one only he knew. My brave, beautiful Zaid. Now I stood utterly alone beside his grave. The ache of their absence, my parents, who should be standing beside me, my sister Victoria, who'd promised she'd always be there for us, Melissa, my best friend since 3rd grade, who'd held my hand through my divorce. It was a physical pain, as sharp as the loss itself. And none of them were here. In a reflexive, desperate gesture, I pulled out my phone, immediately regretting it. Victoria's Instagram feed loaded automatically. Photo after photo of her engagement party at the Grand Horizon Hotel flooded my screen. Happening right now, at this exact moment. There she was, champagne glass raised, her diamond glittering, our parents beaming beside her. The timestamp showed it was posted just 20 minutes ago. While I was listening to the minister speak words that couldn't possibly capture who Caleb was. "Are you doing all right, dear?" I looked up to see Angela, my elderly neighbor, the only person who had come today. Her weathered hand rested gently on my arm, her eyes full of a genuine concern that felt like a lifeline. For 18 months, Angela had brought homemade meals to our house when I was too exhausted from hospital visits to cook. She sat with Caleb when I needed to shower or sleep. She never once treated his illness as an inconvenience. "They didn't come," I whispered, the words barely audible, raw with disbelief. "Not one of them." I couldn't stop remembering Caleb's laugh, the real one, before the illness, when it would bubble up from somewhere deep and uncontrolled. How he declared at 7 years old that he was going to become a doctor to fix kids like me someday. The way he'd insist on wearing his superhero pajamas to chemo treatments because superheroes are brave, even when they're scared. "That boy loved you more than anything in this world," Angela said quietly, her voice thick with emotion. I nodded, a fresh wave of grief washing over me. I remembered how Ethan, my ex-husband, had set up an $850,000 college trust fund for Caleb before his company transferred him overseas. "If anything ever happens," he'd said, his voice unusually serious, "you're the residual beneficiary. I know you'll honor his memory." He couldn't have known how soon, how devastatingly soon those words would matter. Part of me wanted to call my parents, to scream until my voice gave out. How could they choose Victoria's engagement party over their own grandson's funeral? Another part of me felt too numb, too utterly hollow, to feel anything at all. I'd spent 18 months fighting for my son's life, sleeping in hospital chairs, memorizing medical terminology, advocating fiercely when doctors dismissed symptoms. Now, there was nothing left to fight for. My phone buzzed again. A text message. My mother's name appeared on the screen. "We need to talk. Bring the trust documents tomorrow." I stared at the message, reading it twice, 3 times, to make sure I understood. They didn't come to Caleb's funeral, but they were interested in his trust fund. Something cold and analytical cut through my grief for the first time today. Something didn't add up. I typed back, my fingers surprisingly steady. "I'm burying my son today. I can't talk about paperwork right now." Her response came immediately. "Don't be dramatic, Destiny. This is important for the whole family." The whole family. The same family that couldn't spare 2 hours to say goodbye to Caleb. The reality of what was happening began to crystallize, sickening and sharp. This wasn't just about money. It was about the last thing I had from my son, his legacy, the future he'd never have. And I realized, with sudden, terrifying clarity, that I was alone in this fight. My parents, Victoria, even Melissa, they were united, coordinating, while I was vulnerable and isolated in my grief. What had they been planning for? How long? Angela noticed my distress. "What is it?" I showed her my mother's message, watching her kind face harden as she read it. "Oh dear," she said softly, her eyes flashing with a rare anger. "They can't possibly think." I turned off my phone completely. "Whatever they want, it can wait. This moment belongs to Caleb." My voice was a fierce whisper. "I won't let them take that from me, too." Angela placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. "You're not alone, dear. I'm here." The cemetery worker approached hesitantly. "I'm sorry, but we need to finish the service." I looked at Caleb's casket, suspended above the open earth. Was I supposed to walk away now? Just leave him here alone? My body felt frozen, unable to take that first step. Angela stepped forward. "Give her a moment, please," she said firmly. "She's saying goodbye to her boy." The worker nodded, stepping back, respecting the boundary Angela had created. I reached into my pocket and pulled out Caleb's favorite action figure, the one he insisted on keeping with him through every hospital stay. I knelt beside the grave and placed it gently on top of his casket. "I'll protect what's yours. I promise," I whispered, the words a sacred vow. As I stood, something shifted inside me. Through the fog of grief, a small, defiant spark ignited. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty: they would not take my son's legacy without a fight. The morning after the funeral dawned gray and drizzly, matching my mood as I drove to my parents' colonial-style home in Oakwood Heights. I gripped the steering wheel too tightly, my knuckles widening with each mile closer to their house. My throat constricted at the thought of seeing them, after yesterday, after they chose Victoria's engagement party over their own grandson's funeral. I parked behind a familiar silver BMW. Melissa's car. Of course, she was here too. The front door opened before I reached it. My father stood in the entryway, his face a practiced mask of paternal concern that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Destiny, come in. We've been waiting." The living room felt less like a home and more like a corporate boardroom. Victoria sat primly on the cream sofa, legs crossed at the ankle, her blonde hair swept into a perfect, shiny bob. Melissa perched beside her, studying her manicure with sudden, intense fascination, refusing to meet my eyes. When I entered, my mother stood by the mantel, one hand resting on a framed family photo where we were all smiling, a performance for the camera. No one mentioned Caleb. No one said they were sorry. My father didn't waste time. He walked to the mahogany coffee table where a folder lay open, papers arranged in neat stacks. "We need to reallocate the trust with Victoria as trustee," he announced, sliding a document toward me. Sign here and here. I didn't reach for the pen. What are you talking about? Victoria uncrossed her legs and leaned forward, a saccharine smile on her face. Destiny, you're in no condition to manage this kind of money. We're trying to help. My mother stepped closer, her voice honeyed with false sympathy. You've always been impulsive with finances. Remember that boutique you wanted to open after college? Thank goodness your father talked you out of it. I glanced at Melissa, hoping for some flicker of the friendship we once shared. She met my eyes briefly before looking away, her silence confirming her allegiance, a dagger straight to my heart. We've already spoken with Ethan's lawyer, my father said, tapping the papers. Given your mental state, he agrees this is the prudent course. The words hit like physical blows. My mental state? I picked up one of the documents, recognizing legal language about mental competency evaluations. Another page caught my eye. Research on trust law, dated 14 months ago, when Caleb was first hospitalized. You've been planning this since Caleb got sick, I whispered, the realization burning through me like acid. While I was sitting beside his hospital bed, you were researching how to take his money if he died. Victoria sighed dramatically. You're exaggerating again. That's exactly why we're concerned. My father pulled out another document, sliding it across the table. If you refuse to sign, we're prepared to petition for guardianship. The court will understand that grief has compromised your judgment. The full scope of their betrayal crystallized then, cold and sharp. They had dismissed Caleb's illness for 8 months, calling me overprotective when I insisted something was seriously wrong. Now I understood why. They were positioning themselves all along, waiting for the worst to happen. My world shifted. Reality reconstructed itself around this terrible truth. Memory after memory realigned in this new, horrifying light. My mother, 10 months ago. It's probably just anemia, Destiny. You always make mountains out of molehills. My father, when Caleb needed specialized treatment. These doctors are taking advantage of your anxiety. He just needs vitamins. Victoria, declining to visit him in the hospital. Hospitals are depressing. Besides, he's just going to get better anyway. I saw a blueprint peeking out from beneath the trust documents. I pulled it free. Renovation plans for Victoria's new house, a $200,000 kitchen remodel, a home theater, a pool with a waterfall. You never even visited him in the hospital, I said, my voice steadying with the clarity of my anger. Not once in 8 months. Victoria tossed her head, impatient. We all grieve differently, Destiny. Some of us just handle it better. The casual cruelty of her words stunned me. For the first time, I saw my family clearly, not as the loving support system I desperately tried to believe in, but as people who viewed Caleb and me as props in their perfect family image, useful only when convenient. Why now? I asked, my gaze sweeping over their faces. Why the sudden urgency? Victoria exchanged glances with my parents. Something passed between them, a silent communication that excluded me, as it always had. Fine, you deserve to know, Victoria said finally, with a huff. Robert's development company is facing some cash flow issues. The wedding might need to be postponed unless we secure additional funding. My mother fiddled with her pearl necklace. And there's the vacation property in Hilton Head. The market turned, and we're a bit extended. We're not villains, Destiny, my father said, his tone softening to the one he used when closing business deals, utterly devoid of genuine warmth. We're family, facing difficult circumstances. Melissa finally spoke, her voice small, barely a whisper. My divorce will be final next month. Victoria promised me a position at Robert's company. I need this, Destiny. I have the twins to think about. I saw them now. Not cartoon villains, but frightened, self-serving people, willing to sacrifice me and Caleb's entire legacy to maintain their comfortable lifestyles, their status, their comfort. If you don't sign, we'll have to take more drastic measures, my father warned, his kindly mask slipping. My mother reached for my hand. After everything we've done for you and Caleb all these years. I almost laughed. What exactly had they done? Sent birthday cards with $20 bills? Called once a month to ask superficial questions about our lives? Don't make this harder than it needs to be, my father said, his voice hardening. You're not thinking clearly. Victoria checked her watch. We need this resolved within 60 days, before Robert's next project financing deadline. The desperation in their eyes told me everything. They didn't care about my mental state. They needed Caleb's money, my money now, to solve their problems. I stood, gathered the documents, and placed them back in the folder. I need time to think, I said, heading for the door. Destiny! My father's voice carried the sharp edge I remembered from childhood arguments. Don't walk away from this table! I closed the front door behind me with quiet finality. In my car, I pressed my forehead against the steering wheel, overwhelmed by what had just happened. My phone buzzed. A text from Angela. How did it go? I'm here if you need to talk. Before I could respond, another call came through. Ethan's parents. I answered with shaking hands. Destiny. Martha's voice was warm with genuine concern. We just heard about the funeral. We're so sorry we couldn't be there. We were in Europe and just got the news. We loved that boy so much. George added, his voice breaking. Their grief sounded real, their concern authentic, unlike the calculated performance I'd just witnessed from my own family. As I hung up, I remembered something Ethan had mentioned when setting up Caleb's trust. If you ever have questions, contact Richard Donovan. He's the best trust attorney in the state. For the first time today, I felt a flicker of hope. I wasn't alone in this fight. Angela, who saw how I cared for Caleb every day. Ethan's parents, who loved him without condition. Richard Donovan, who knew exactly what Ethan intended for Caleb's money. I started the car, my decision made. I wouldn't try to fight this battle alone. I reached for my phone and found Richard Donovan's number in my contacts. Mr. Donovan's office. A receptionist answered. I need to speak with him immediately, I said, surprising myself with the steadiness in my voice. It's about the Caleb Walker Trust. That same day, the law office of Richard Donovan gleamed with polished wood and leather-bound books. I clutched my folder of documents so tightly my knuckles turned white. After 2 sleepless nights researching trust law online, I was still not sure I understood what rights I had, or how my family could attempt to take Caleb's legacy from me. Richard rose from behind his mahogany desk when his assistant showed me in. He was older than I expected, with silver hair and reading glasses perched on his nose. His handshake was firm, his eyes kind but assessing. Mrs. Walker, please have a seat. I'm very sorry about your son. Thank you. My voice caught. I'd heard those words dozens of times in the past week, but his tone carried genuine empathy rather than obligation. I slid the folder across his desk. These are all the documents I have about Caleb's trust. My ex-husband Ethan set it up before his company transferred him overseas. Richard opened the folder, scanning the contents with practiced efficiency. He nodded occasionally, pausing to read certain sections more carefully. The silence stretched until I couldn't bear it. My family wants me to sign over control of the trust. They claim I'm not mentally stable enough to manage it because of my grief. The words tasted bitter on my tongue. They didn't even come to Caleb's funeral. Richard looked up sharply. They didn't attend the funeral? No. My sister Victoria had her engagement party the same day. My parents and my former best friend Melissa chose to go to that instead. He removed his glasses, pinching the bridge of his nose. I remember when Ethan set up this trust. He was very specific about his intentions. Richard opened his desk drawer and pulled out a manila folder with Ethan's name on the tab. My breath caught. I wasn't expecting him to have separate records. Ethan was exceptionally thorough, Richard explained, extracting a notarized document. This is his statement of intent for the trust. He handed me the paper, and I read Ethan's familiar handwriting. This trust is to secure Caleb's future. And if the worst happens, to provide for Destiny. who sacrificed everything for his care. Tears blurred my vision. Even from across the ocean, Ethan had prepared for this possibility. Had seen what I couldn't bear to acknowledge. "There's more," Richard said, turning his computer monitor so I could see it. "These are phone records from our office over the past year." The spreadsheet showed multiple calls from numbers I recognized immediately: my parents' landline and Victoria's cell phone. "They contacted you about Caleb's trust?" My voice sharpened. "Not you specifically. They called asking about trust provisions and beneficiary laws. My assistant flagged it because she recognized the names from Ethan's file. They never actually spoke to an attorney here." A chilling clarity cut through my grief for the first time in days. "They knew about the trust terms before Caleb died. That's why they've been planning this." "It appears so," Richard said, his expression hardening. "Mrs. Walker, I want to be very clear about something. This trust has explicit provisions preventing family interference. Ethan built in multiple layers of protection specifically to ensure the funds would go to Caleb, or to you as the residual beneficiary. They have no legal standing to challenge this. The trust is ironclad." The weight pressing on my chest lightened slightly. "So they can't take it?" "Not legally, no. But they might try other tactics, claiming you're mentally unfit due to grief, for instance." I thought of my mother's dismissive text message at the funeral. Victoria's cold calculation. My father's uncomfortable silence as they presented papers for me to sign. "So, I don't need to fight them for the trust," I said slowly, the pieces coming together. "I just need to prove their intentions." Richard's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "That would certainly strengthen your position. Do you have any documentation of their attempts to gain control?" I pulled out my phone, showing him my mother's text messages from the funeral day. His eyebrows rose as he read. "This is extremely helpful," he said. "Now I suggest we arrange a meeting with your family, on your terms, in a public place." 2 days later, I sat at a corner table in Riverside Coffee, a manila envelope placed deliberately in front of me. The shop bustled with afternoon customers, exactly as I'd hoped. Richard's advice echoed in my mind: public places discourage scenes. Control the narrative from the beginning. Ask. Angela waited in her car across the street, ready if I needed backup. Richard was on standby for a call. For the first time since Caleb's diagnosis, I didn't feel completely alone. My family arrived together. Victoria, leading the procession in designer sunglasses. My parents following like attendants. Melissa trailed behind, avoiding my eyes. They took seats around the table without ordering drinks, clearly expecting this to be brief. Victoria immediately reached for the manila envelope. "So you've signed the papers? I knew you'd be reasonable." I placed my hand firmly on the envelope. "Before we discuss any papers, I want to know why none of you came to Caleb's funeral." My mother sighed dramatically. "Destiny, we've been through this. Victoria's engagement was planned months ago. We couldn't cancel everything on such short notice. It was your grandson's funeral," I said quietly, my voice laced with the pain of the memory. "And we grieved in our own way," my father replied, glancing nervously at nearby tables. "Everyone processes loss differently." I opened the envelope and slid out several photos. Screenshots from Victoria's Instagram. Timestamp during Caleb's funeral. Champagne glasses raised. Diamond ring flashing. Everyone laughing. "While I was burying my son, you were drinking champagne and laughing." My voice remained steady, but people at nearby tables glanced over. Victoria's face flushed. "You're taking those out of context. That's not fair." I pulled out a second document from the envelope, the notarized trust. Terms with no amendment without grantor's consent, highlighted in yellow. Ethan made his intentions very clear. "This money is Caleb's legacy to me." My father reached for the papers. "Let me see that." I pulled them back before he could grab them. "I've spoken with Richard Donovan. He has Ethan's original statement of intent. The trust cannot be modified, transferred, or accessed by anyone but me." Victoria's carefully composed expression cracked. You don't deserve that money. You'll just waste it. Her voice carried. Several customers turned to stare. Lower your voice, my mother hissed. Why? I asked, looking directly at Victoria. Are you worried people will hear how you tried to take advantage of your grieving sister? How you couldn't be bothered to attend your nephew's funeral, but want his college fund? Victoria stood abruptly. This is ridiculous. We're trying to help you. I don't need your kind of help, I said, gathering the papers back into the envelope. I'm not signing anything. Ever. My father leaned forward, voice low and threatening. You're making a mistake, Destiny. We can make things very difficult for you. You already have, I replied, standing. For my entire life. But not anymore. I walked out, feeling their stares burning into my back. Outside, Angela waited in her car, window rolled down. When I slid into the passenger seat, she gave me a proud smile. You stood up to them. Good for you. My phone rang. Richard calling for an update. How did it go? He asked when I answered. Do we need to prepare for immediate legal action? I described the confrontation while Angela drove us away from the coffee shop. Richard listened carefully, then confirmed we were in a strong legal position. They'll likely try something else, he warned. But you've established boundaries, which is critical. After we hung up, another call came through. Ethan's parents. They offered to fly in from Arizona to testify about Ethan's intentions if needed. We always knew Caleb's care was your priority, Ethan's mother said. We'll support you however we can. A text message followed from Mark, my former coworker who'd visited Caleb regularly during his hospital stays. Angela told me what's happening. Whatever you need, I'm here. For the first time in weeks, I felt the weight on my chest lighten. I wasn't fighting alone anymore. In Angela's driveway, I took a moment before getting out of the car. I touched Caleb's photo on my dashboard, his last school picture taken before he got sick, his smile still radiant with hope. First step done, buddy, I whispered. Angela squeezed my hand. You did wonderfully today. I nodded, staring at the horizon. But they won't give up easily. They'll try something bigger next. And we'll be ready, Angela said firmly. You're not alone anymore, Destiny. I took a deep breath, feeling something unfamiliar building inside me. Not just grief, not just anger, but resolve. They couldn't be bothered to say goodbye to my son. They wouldn't get to decide what happens to his legacy. 3 days after the coffee shop confrontation, I spread documents across Richard Donovan's mahogany desk. My hands were steady as I arranged them into neat piles. Grief still pulsed beneath my skin, but something else had emerged alongside it, a cold, clear objectivity that surprised me with its intensity. They'll file for guardianship, Richard said, tapping a finger against a legal brief. His office smelled of leather and old books, the kind of place where battles are planned rather than fought. They'll try to prove you're mentally unfit due to grief. It's their clearest path to the trust. I nodded, studying the timeline I'd created, 18 months of Caleb's illness mapped out in excruciating detail. Victoria never does her own dirty work. She'll use Mom and Dad as the petitioners. Maybe even Melissa. Smart observation, Richard said, genuine respect in his voice. We need to document every interaction since Caleb's diagnosis. Every hospital visit you made. Every appointment they missed. I pulled out my phone, opening my calendar. I have records of all appointments. I can prove I never missed a single one. My voice caught slightly. Not even the day after Ethan left abroad. Richard made a note. And your parents? Victoria? 0 visits. Not when he was diagnosed. Not during the 3 weeks he spent in isolation after the bone marrow treatment failed. The memory stung, but I pushed through it. Not even when the doctors told us there was nothing more they could do. Document it all, Richard said. We don't move yet. We prepare. We gather evidence. We anticipate their attack. When they come, and they will, we'll be ready. I ran my finger along a hospital bill, remembering how I'd learned to decipher medical codes and challenge insurance denials. How I'd become Caleb's advocate when no one else would. 8 months of treatments, and not one visit from them. Not one. Richard leaned forward. Destiny, I need you to understand something. This isn't just about proving you're mentally competent. It's about proving they never cared about Caleb, only his money. The words hurt, a sharp jab, but the truth in them steadied me. Then that's exactly what we'll prove. Over the next hour, we sorted through financial statements, showing my meticulous handling of Caleb's medical expenses. Richard brought in a notary to witness my signing of affidavits. The preparation felt like building armor, each document another plate of protection around Caleb's legacy. They'll claim your grief makes you unstable, Richard warned. We need to counter that narrative before they can establish it. Angela has kept a journal, I said, surprising myself with this sudden knowledge. She documented every time she helped with Caleb during his illness. She told me yesterday. Richard nodded approvingly. Perfect. A neutral third party's observations will carry significant weight. I pulled out my notebook. I've also contacted Caleb's primary oncologist and his school teacher. Both are willing to provide character statements. Excellent, Richard said. Now, what about Ethan? His intention when creating the trust could be crucial. I called his parents last night. They're coordinating with his attorney to document his original intentions. The words came easily now, each strategic move clear in my mind. And I've installed security cameras at my house. If they try to confront me again, it'll be documented. Richard made a note. I'm consulting with Dr. Elizabeth Warner tomorrow. She's a psychiatric expert who can evaluate you and counter any mental fitness challenges they might bring. I hesitated before sharing my next thought. I've been collecting screenshots. Every time they dismissed Caleb's illness as nothing serious. Every text where they claimed I was overreacting. My voice hardened. They created a pattern of minimizing his condition while simultaneously planning to take his trust fund. That's exactly the kind of evidence we need, Richard said quietly. Not just to defend you, but to expose their motives. I stared out his office window at the autumn leaves dancing across the parking lot. Caleb loved fall, the colors, the smell of cinnamon, the way leaves crunched beneath his feet. Last October, I'd wheeled him outside the hospital just so he could feel the crisp air on his face. Are you all right? Richard asked. Just remembering, I said, returning to the present. What else do we need? As Richard outlined our next steps, my phone buzzed with a text from Angela. Just heard from Martha at the hospital. Melissa was asking questions about Caleb's treatment schedule. Be careful. My stomach tightened. I showed Richard the message. They're gathering ammunition, he said grimly. Melissa would have access to information about when you were at the hospital. Your emotional state during treatment. She signed something, hasn't she? The realization hit me like a physical blow. An affidavit claiming I was unstable during Caleb's illness. Richard's silence confirmed my suspicion. She was my friend since 3rd grade. I whispered, the betrayal cutting deeper than I expected. She held my hand through my divorce. Victoria is recruiting anyone with inside knowledge of your life, Richard said gently. It raises the threat level considerably. I remembered now Melissa's increasingly infrequent visits as Caleb's condition worsened. Her uncomfortable expression when I broke down after a particularly devastating prognosis. The way she'd stopped meeting my eyes in those final weeks. She'll claim she witnessed erratic behavior, I said, my voice hollow. And she wouldn't be entirely wrong. I did fall apart sometimes. Who wouldn't? For the first time since our strategy session began, doubt crept in. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was falling apart. I glanced at my trembling hands. Don't, Richard said firmly. This is exactly what they want, to make you doubt yourself. My phone buzzed again. Angela, coming by Richard's office. Found my journals. You need to see these. 30 minutes later, Angela walked in carrying a stack of notebooks. Her silver hair was neatly pinned back, her eyes fierce with protective energy. "Melissa can say whatever she wants," Angela announced, placing the journals on Richard's desk. "But I documented everything. Every day you spent at that hospital. Every night you sat up with Caleb when he couldn't sleep. Every meal I brought because you wouldn't leave his side." Then she took my hands in hers. "Don't let them make you doubt yourself, Destiny. That's exactly what they want." The warmth of her hands steadied mine. I looked from Angela to Richard, then to the mountain of evidence we'd accumulated. My son's legacy protected by truth. Documented fact by documented fact. "You're right," I said, straightening my shoulders. "I need to prepare for character assassination, not just legal challenges." As I organized Angela's journals into our evidence pile, I realized we were building more than a legal defense. We were creating a monument to the truth of who really stood by Caleb when it mattered, and who didn't. Later that evening, after Angela left, my hands shook as I taped the last photo to the evidence board in Richard's office. It showed my parents at Victoria's engagement party. Champagne glasses raised in celebration, exactly 42 minutes after Caleb's casket was lowered into the ground. "That's the final piece," Richard said, stepping back to survey our work. The conference room wall had transformed into a comprehensive timeline of betrayal. Medical records showing every appointment I attended. Financial statements proving responsible management of Caleb's medical expenses. Witness statements from hospital staff, neighbors, and Caleb's teachers. A documented 18-month absence of my family during Caleb's illness. "Will it be enough?" I asked, straightening a document that detailed Victoria's unauthorized access to Caleb's medical files. Richard adjusted his glasses. His expression was serious but confident. "They'll file for emergency guardianship, claiming you're mentally unfit, but we've anticipated every argument they could make." He tapped the notarized statement from Ethan's parents. "This alone makes their position legally tenuous." I traced my finger along the timeline we'd created. 8 months of hospital visits, countless nights sleeping in uncomfortable chairs beside Caleb's bed. The treatments, the hopes, the setbacks, all documented with meticulous care. "I never thought I'd need to prove I was a good mother," I whispered. "You shouldn't have to," Richard said, placing a supportive hand on my shoulder. "But people who want what isn't theirs will create whatever narrative serves them." As if on cue, my phone buzzed with a text from Angela. I read it aloud. 23 neighbors signed the character petition. A small victory, but each one strengthened our position. I'd spent the past week gathering an arsenal of truth against my family's inevitable attack. Security cameras now monitored my home, recording any uninvited visits. I documented every text, every voicemail, every social media post where Victoria subtly questioned my mental state. "They're painting me as unstable," I said, staring at Victoria's recent Facebook post asking for prayers for family members struggling with mental health issues after loss. The comment section overflowed with sympathetic responses. None mentioning that she didn't attend her nephew's funeral. Richard nodded grimly. "Classic strategy. They can't win on legal grounds, so they're trying to win in the court of public opinion first." The phone on his desk rang. Richard answered, his expression darkening as he listened. "I see. Thank you for letting us know." He hung up and turned to me. "That was my contact at Memorial Hospital. Someone requested Caleb's complete medical records yesterday." My stomach dropped. "Who?" "Victoria. She used an old emergency contact form to gain access." The room seemed to tilt slightly. "They'll twist everything," I said, my voice rising. "They'll find the one time I questioned a medication dosage or got emotional with a nurse and use it to make me look incompetent. They're getting desperate," Richard said. "This confidentiality breach shows how far they're willing to go." I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself. "What else are they doing that we don't know about?" Richard opened his laptop. "Let's find out." He typed quickly, then turned the screen toward me. "They've been calling your former colleagues at the marketing firm." A LinkedIn message from my old supervisor appeared. "Destiny, your sister called asking about your emotional stability during your employment. What's going on?" Call me. They're building a case against me on every front, I said, the anger finally breaking through my grief. They're trying to erase everything I did for Caleb. Richard closed the laptop. We need to add a defamation counterclaim to our strategy. This goes beyond the trust. Now they're attacking your reputation. I thought of Caleb's brave face during treatments. How he never complained, even on his worst days. If my 9-year-old could face down death with courage, I could face down my family with the same resolve. Let them try, I said, my voice steadier than it had been in weeks. We have something they don't. What's that? Richard asked. The truth, I answered, turning back to our evidence board. Every moment I spent with Caleb, every decision I made for him, every sacrifice, it's all here. They can't erase that. Richard nodded approvingly. I'll update our legal response package to include their recent actions. By night, we'd refined our strategy, accounting for Victoria's escalating tactics. Richard confirmed. Our legal response is complete. Character witnesses prepared. Evidence organized, counterclaims ready. Angela called as I was driving home. The security system is working perfectly, she told me. I tested it once again while you were gone. Thank you, I said, feeling a rush of gratitude for this woman who'd become more family to me than my actual relatives. Ethan's parents arrive tomorrow. They're bringing documentation about the trust's original purpose. You've done everything possible to protect Caleb's legacy, Angela said firmly. Now, we wait for them to make their move. As I pulled into my driveway, I realized something had shifted inside me. The paralyzing grief hadn't disappeared, but it had been joined by something else, a fierce, protective anger that burned away the fog of despair. I wasn't afraid anymore. I was angry, and I was ready. The next morning, the sheriff's knock hit like a hammer. When I opened the door, his face was professionally blank as he extended a thick manila envelope. Destiny Walker, you've been served. My fingers trembled as I took it. The weight felt wrong. Too heavy for mere paper. Too light for the destruction it contained. The sheriff tipped his hat and left while I stood frozen in my doorway, the envelope burning against my skin. Inside, I spread the documents across my kitchen table and scanned the heading. Emergency petition for guardianship. My stomach lurched. They weren't just coming for Caleb's money anymore. They wanted control of me. The phone rang. Richard, they filed, I said, my voice hollow. I know. Just got the notification. How are you holding up? I stared at the affidavit attached to the petition. Melissa's signature jumped out first, 3 pages detailing every moment of weakness she'd witnessed during Caleb's illness. The times I forgot to eat. The night I sobbed uncontrollably in the hospital hallway. The morning I couldn't remember if I'd taken my own medication. They've twisted everything, I whispered. They quoted his medical records. Things I told the doctors in confidence. Victoria shouldn't have had access to those files, Richard said, his voice hardening. That's our countermove. The hospital ethics committee is already investigating. I flipped to the next page. Financial statements showing my depleted savings account. 18 months without steady income while caring for Caleb had drained everything. They'd highlighted every overdraft fee, every late payment, presenting it as evidence of financial irresponsibility rather than the reality of a mother spending everything to save her son. The hearing is tomorrow, Richard said. We knew this was coming. We're ready. But I'm not sure I am. This wasn't just about money anymore. They were trying to take away my autonomy, my dignity, my very identity as a competent adult. The document before me painted a picture of a woman falling apart, unable to make rational decisions, a danger to herself without proper supervision. Have you seen the newspaper? Richard asked quietly. I pulled up the local news website on my phone. There they were, my parents, sitting in their immaculate living room, sorrow etched into their carefully composed expressions. The headline made me nauseous. Family seeks help for grieving mother. My father's quote appeared in bold. This breaks our hearts, but we have to protect her from herself. Protect her from herself. I switched to social media and found Victoria's carefully crafted post. A throwback photo of us as children, her arm around my shoulders. Sometimes the hardest thing to do is step in when someone you love is suffering. Please keep our family in your thoughts during this difficult time. #mental health awareness, #family first. The comment section overflowed with support for them. People who didn't know us, didn't know Caleb, offering prayers and praise for their bravery in helping me. They've already tried and convicted me in the court of public opinion. I said, my voice thick with disbelief. Courts don't decide cases based on Instagram likes. Richard replied, his tone firm. I filed our counter-petition. Ethan's parents arrived this morning. They're ready to testify about his intentions for the trust. The Hospital Ethics Committee has issued a formal statement about the unauthorized access to Caleb's records. I touched the silver locket around my neck, feeling Caleb's photo inside. What if it's not enough? It will be, Richard said with quiet confidence. Angela has more than 20 neighbors coming to support you. Your former supervisor has submitted a statement about your professionalism, and Dr. Levine, Caleb's primary physician, has provided an affidavit praising your medical decision-making throughout his treatment. My phone pinged with a text from Angela. We're all set for tomorrow. The whole block is behind you. For the first time since receiving the sheriff's papers, I felt something beyond fear. A spark of determination, fueled by the sheer absurdity of their claims. They weren't there, any of them. Not for one chemo treatment, not for one blood transfusion, not for one night when Caleb's fever spiked to 104 and I thought I might lose him right there in the pediatric oncology unit. I've also submitted the security footage. Richard continued, showing Victoria and your mother trying to enter your house last week when you were meeting with me. I remembered coming home to find the doorbell camera notification, watching the recording of them testing doorknobs, peering through windows. We're hitting back with everything, Richard said. The restraining order request has been included in our counter-petition. I looked at the documents spread across my table, their lies printed on legal letterhead, made official with court stamps and case numbers. Tomorrow, a judge would read these words and make decisions about my life based on them. Get some rest, Richard advised. Tomorrow is going to be intense. But rest didn't come. I was reviewing my testimony for the fourth time when the doorbell camera alert flashed on my phone at 9:48 p.m. Victoria stood on my porch alone. I considered ignoring her, but something told me to face this. I activated the recording function on my phone before opening the door, keeping the security chain latched. What do you want, Victoria? She looked different than at the coffee shop, softer somehow, her expression concerned rather than confrontational. If I didn't know better, I might believe she actually cared. Can I come in? Just to talk? She asked, her voice gentle. No. Her shoulders dropped slightly. Destiny, please. This doesn't have to be so public. So ugly. You made it public when you gave that interview. You made it ugly when you accessed Caleb's private medical records. Victoria glanced toward the security camera, clearly aware she was being recorded. I'm offering you one last chance to avoid public embarrassment. Drop your opposition to the guardianship petition. Sign over control of the trust to me as administrator. We'll withdraw the petition, and no one ever has to know about your episodes. The word hung between us like poison. The night you called Melissa at 3 a.m., hysterical about Caleb's breathing. The time the hospital nearly called child services because you couldn't remember when he'd last taken his medication. Her voice remained sympathetic, but her eyes were cold. We'll destroy your reputation completely. Everyone will know how unstable you are. I felt a strange calm settling over me. I think you should leave now, Victoria. Her mask slipped then, just for a moment, but it was enough. Rage flashed across her features before she composed herself. You think you deserve that money? You were always the burden, the problem child, the disappointment. She leaned closer to the door. We carried you your entire life. Now it's time you did something for this family. I closed the door without another word. My hands were steady for the first time today. I immediately called Richard, forwarding him the recording. Perfect, he said after listening. Her mask finally slipped. This is exactly what we needed. It was past midnight when Angela arrived with an overnight bag. I thought you could use some company, she said, setting a thermos of tea on my kitchen table. Thank you, I whispered, unsure if I could explain how much her presence meant. Tomorrow, we show them what real strength looks like, she said, squeezing my hand. My phone lit up with a text from Richard. Everything is ready. Ethan believed in you. So do we. I couldn't sleep, so I sat in Caleb's room instead, holding his favorite stuffed dinosaur. The glow-in-the-dark stars we'd stuck to his ceiling still shone faintly. I took out my locket and opened it to see his smiling face. Tomorrow is for you, buddy, I whispered to his photo. For your legacy. For the first time since the sheriff knocked on my door, I felt something beyond fear or determination. I felt ready. The next morning, I entered the courtroom with my head held high, flanked by Richard, Angela, and Ethan's parents. The polished wood and solemn atmosphere reminded me of a church, a temple where truth should matter more than performance. Victoria, my parents, and Melissa sat on the opposite side, their faces arranged in expressions of practiced concern. My stomach nodded as I took my seat. It had been 48 hours since the sheriff served me with papers claiming I was mentally unfit to manage my own affairs, let alone my son's legacy. Richard squeezed my arm gently as we settled at the defendant's table. All rise for the Honorable Judge Marion Peabody. A stern-faced woman in her 60s entered, her silver hair pulled back in a severe bun. She reviewed the emergency petition with narrowed eyes before addressing the courtroom. These are serious allegations. I expect both sides to present evidence, not emotion. Her gaze swept across both tables. Mr. Harrington, you may begin for the petitioners. My family's attorney rose, his expensive suit and confident posture reflecting their certainty they'd win. Your Honor, this is a case of a family desperately trying to help. A daughter and sister who is spiraling after an unimaginable loss. He walked toward the bench, presenting documents with practiced solemnity. Miss Walker has exhibited concerning behaviors since her son's passing. Erratic financial decisions, isolation, refusal to accept help from those who love her most. I clenched my fists under the table as he continued, painting me as unstable and dangerous to myself and Caleb's money. When Melissa took the stand, my chest tightened. Destiny changed during Caleb's illness. She testified, avoiding my eyes. She became obsessive about treatments. Paranoid that doctors were missing something. She'd call me at 3 a.m., hysterical. The memory of those nights slashed through me, sitting beside Caleb's hospital bed, terrified as his fever spiked, reaching out to someone I thought was my friend. My isolation wasn't paranoia. It was abandonment by the very people testifying against me. My mother took the stand next, dabbing at tears that appeared on command. We are heartbroken watching her self-destruct. This isn't about money. It's about protecting our daughter when she can't protect herself. The judge's expression softened at my mother's performance. A cold wave of fear washed over me. She's buying their act. Then Richard stood, and everything shifted. Your Honor, what we're witnessing today is not concern, but calculation. His voice filled the courtroom with quiet authority. Miss Walker hasn't self-destructed. She's been systematically targeted by family members who abandoned her during her son's illness, but suddenly appeared when they learned of his trust fund. He began methodically dismantling their case, presenting complete hospital records that chronicled every appointment I attended, every treatment decision I researched and approved, every night I slept in a hospital chair. Now I'd like to call Miss Catherine Winters, Hospital Records Administrator. A middle-aged woman with kind eyes took the stand and confirmed what Richard suspected. Our system shows Miss Victoria Walker accessed Caleb's complete medical records 2 weeks ago using an outdated emergency contact form. This constitutes a serious privacy violation. Victoria shifted uncomfortably in her seat as whispers rippled through the courtroom. Angela testified next, her steady voice carrying decades of wisdom. I watched Destiny care for that boy every single day. When he couldn't keep food down, she researched what might help and stayed up learning to prepare meals that wouldn't make him sick. When he was scared about treatments, she created superhero stories to help him understand what was happening. Her eyes found mine. I never once saw her falter. Ethan's father, Robert, took the stand next. Though we'd never been close, his testimony was clear and certain. My son established this trust with explicit instructions. He told me, "Dad, if anything happens to Caleb, Destiny gets everything." She sacrificed her career, her savings, everything, to give him the best care possible. She'll honor his memory better than anyone. The judge's expression had changed, her eyes sharper, more focused on my family now. "Your Honor," Richard said, "I'd like to present one more piece of evidence." He played the security recording from last night, Victoria's unannounced visit to my home. Her voice filled the courtroom. "We'll destroy your reputation completely. Everyone will know how unstable you are." My calm response followed. "I think you should leave now, Victoria." Victoria's true colors emerged in her next words. "You think you deserve that money? You were always the burden." My sister's face flushed deep red. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. My father stared straight ahead, his jaw tight. The judge called a 15-minute recess. When she returned, Victoria attempted to speak, but Judge Peabody silenced her with a sharp gesture. "Mr. Donovan, do you have additional evidence?" Richard nodded. "One final exhibit, Your Honor." He played an audio recording from our coffee shop meeting. The voices were crystal clear. "My mother. Once the guardianship is approved, we can settle Victoria's mortgage situation. Victoria. And the beach house repairs. The contractor needs $50,000 by next month. My father. Once we have guardianship, we can use the money however we want. Destiny won't have any say." The courtroom fell silent. My family's attorneys shifted papers aimlessly, clearly unprepared for this revelation. Judge Peabody called another brief recess. When she returned, her expression had hardened into granite. "I've reviewed all evidence and testimony in this matter. This court finds no basis whatsoever for the emergency guardianship petition. In fact, what I see is deeply disturbing. A coordinated attempt to exploit a grieving mother for financial gain." Victoria started to protest, but the judge cut her off. "Miss Victoria Walker, I strongly suggest you remain silent. This court dismisses the petition with prejudice, meaning the petitioners cannot refile on these grounds. Furthermore, I am ordering an investigation into possible perjury by Melissa Bennett and Charles and Elaine Walker, whose testimonies directly contradict documented evidence." The judge continued, each word hitting like a hammer blow. "I am granting an immediate restraining order prohibiting all petitioners from contacting Destiny Walker. The trust will be unfrozen immediately and secured against further challenges." Victoria's composure finally cracked. Her face contorted as she tried to maintain dignity while her plans crumbled. My mother began crying, real tears this time. My father stared ahead, his expression frozen in disbelief. "Miss Walker," the judge said, looking directly at me, her gaze filled with a quiet respect. "This court finds you have acted with remarkable strength and clarity during an unimaginable loss. Your son would be proud of how you've protected his legacy." My parents and Victoria rose, attempting to approach me, but a bailiff stepped between us, enforcing the new restraining order. Richard turned to me, his professional demeanor softening. "The system worked today, Destiny. Justice was done." Angela's eyes shone with tears. "Caleb would be so proud of you, dear." Ethan's parents embraced me, his mother whispering, "You've honored our grandson and our son today." As I left the courtroom, I touched Caleb's photo in my locket. The small silver frame held his last school picture, grinning despite having lost his hair to chemo, his eyes bright with the determination that carried him through 18 months of fighting. Reporters waited outside, microphones extended. A month ago, I would have ducked my head and hurried past. Today I stopped. "Mrs. Walker, how do you feel about the court's decision?" I straightened my shoulders, feeling stronger than I had since the day we received Caleb's diagnosis. Today, justice was done for my son. As cameras flashed, I walked toward the future Caleb would have wanted for me. One where his memory isn't just preserved, but honored through the strength he helped me discover. The trust fund isn't just money, it's his legacy, and I've proven worthy of protecting it. The financial advisor slid a folder across his mahogany desk. These investment options would create sustainable funding for the scholarship program while preserving the principal. He explained. I studied the numbers, no longer intimidated by financial jargon. 1 week since the hearing, and already the world felt different. The Pediatric Hematology Fellowship needs to be fully funded, I said, tapping the proposal. That's non-negotiable. The advisor nodded, making notes. And the restraining order was holding firm. They couldn't come within 1,000 feet. My voice didn't waver anymore when I mentioned my family. Strange how quickly family had become an administrative term rather than an emotional one. The local paper published a front-page story yesterday. Mother vindicated in trust battle. I'd received dozens of supportive calls and messages. Even Victoria's fiancé called to apologize before announcing their engagement was off. My parents faced possible perjury charges, and Melissa was fired after her recorded testimony circulated through her workplace. When I left the advisor's office, Angela waited in her ancient Buick, window rolled down despite the autumn chill. All set? She asked. All set. I slid into the passenger seat, remembering all those rides to and from the hospital with Caleb. How Angela would bring thermoses of homemade soup when cafeteria food became unbearable. How she'd sit with him while I showered or napped. Never thought I could do this, I admitted as we drove. Stand up to them, create something lasting. Angela patted my hand. I knew from the moment you placed that action figure in his grave and made that promise. That night, I slept peacefully for the first time since Caleb's diagnosis. No nightmares of hospital corridors or beeping machines. Instead, I dreamed of Caleb laughing, whole and strong, running through sunlit fields. Richard called the next morning. The foundation paperwork is filed. The trust is locked down tight. Not even the Supreme Court could touch it now. My neighbors organized a meal train. Every evening, someone appeared at my door with casseroles, soups, fresh bread. Small kindnesses that would have overwhelmed me with gratitude before, but now felt like confirmation of something I was slowly beginning to understand. Family isn't always blood. I pulled out a photo of Caleb. Not a hospital photo, but one from before at the beach, his smile wide beneath a baseball cap. For the first time, I could look at it without dissolving into tears. I know what to do with your legacy now, buddy, I whispered. 6 months later, I stood in the pediatric blood disorder unit where Caleb spent so many hours. The walls were brighter now, painted with underwater scenes that Caleb would have loved. A plaque beside the nurse's station read, Caleb Walker Memorial Wing. A young nurse approached, extending her hand. I'm Jennifer Abrams, the first Caleb Walker scholar. I can't thank you enough for this opportunity to specialize in pediatric hematology. Caleb would have been thrilled, I said, and realized I was smiling as I spoke about him. Not the tight, painful smile of someone holding back tears, but a genuine expression of joy at his memory. He wanted to be a doctor himself someday. The foundation is making such a difference, Jennifer said. 3 families have received emergency housing assistance already. The Caleb's Legacy Foundation now supported families facing the same battles we fought, covering expenses, insurance gaps, providing emergency housing near hospitals, funding specialized training for pediatric nurses. Each board meeting brought new possibilities for expanding our reach. Angela served as volunteer coordinator, organizing a network of people who provided meals, transportation, and childcare for families with hospitalized children. Richard handled all legal matters pro bono, ensuring the foundation's stability. You've created something beautiful from something tragic, Ethan's mother told me during her monthly visit. She and her husband had become grandparent advocates, helping other grandparents navigate the medical system when their grandchildren fell ill. I found myself speaking at support groups, mentoring parents new to the terrifying world of childhood chronic illness. The first step is believing you can do this, I told them. The second is knowing you don't have to do it alone. My voice no longer shook when I spoke in public. My hands no longer trembled when I signed documents. The woman who stood frozen at her son's grave,